Hey, what's going on, AP government people? We have Government in America, Chapter 10 for you today. This one is on elections and voting behavior. This is from the 15th edition, but if you have another edition, it is sure to match up very closely with it. So let's start off talking about how American elections work. Well, there's three types of elections that you should be familiar with. The first is a primary, and this determines party nominations. We talked about this in a previous chapter. The next is a general election, which determines the winner between parties. So think of the presidential election, that's an example of a general. And then the third are specific policy questions in which voters vote on issues. So some examples of this could be a referendum in which voters can pass or deny a law. Think about a local school board election, bonds, decriminalization of drugs. Every once in a while you'll hear a state have that. And also the initiative. And both of these were really popularized in the progressive era by this guy, a senator from Wisconsin, Robert La Follette. And the initiative petition is the idea that citizens can propose laws if they receive signatures equal to 10% of the previous election's voters. So once they get signatures of 10%, then they can propose a specific law. And these vary by state. And this is an example of grassroots, which means that really the ideas come from the people, from the bottom up, as opposed top down from government officials. Okay, let's look at three elections in U.S. history. The election of 1800 is John Adams versus Thomas Jefferson. There was no campaigning done by the candidates. Jefferson wins, and this is known as the Revolution of 1800, which is a peaceful transition of power between political parties. Now, in a quirk in the electoral system at the time, Burr and Jefferson tied in the Electoral College, and the House chose Jefferson after 35 ballots. Today, there are separate electoral votes for the president and vice president. So Burr was really running as Jefferson's vice president. Now, I do have a video on each of these elections, so feel free to check out the description below for more info on them if you want. Let's go to the election of 1896. We have William McKinley versus William Jennings Bryan. Now, the issues during this time were tariffs and the gold standard. It was all about the economy. Now, McKinley did campaigning at home via something known as the front porch, which he really did not leave his porch, and he just would campaign and give speeches from that. Bryan campaigned heavily across the country by train, and he traveled 18,000 miles. And here is a map of the different areas that he traveled throughout the United States. So he heavily campaigned across the country. And there was an 80% voter turnout in the election of 1896, one of the highest turnouts ever. McKinley beat Bryan, and sadly for Bryan, he would go on to lose 3 presidential elections. Who does that sound like? We'll see that guy in a little bit if you're waiting on him. Let's go to 2008. We have John McCain, who is a Republican, versus Barack Obama, who is a Democrat. And Obama narrowly defeated Hillary Clinton in the primaries, and he went on to defeat McCain in the general election, and McCain was tied to the Bush administration. So that was one reason why McCain lost. And Obama ran on change and won. Okay, so let's talk about whether to vote, a citizen's first choice. Over time, suffrage, or the ability to vote, has expanded greatly. In 1800, that election we just talked about, only white property-owning males 21 and older could vote. So that is an incredibly small percentage of the population. Today, virtually all citizens 18 and older are eligible to vote. However, as suffrage expanded, the voter turnout rate has decreased. This is really a paradox. Why, if more people are able to vote, do less people actually vote? When you take economics, you're going to learn about a term called opportunity cost, and that's really what you are giving up to do something. So there's a potentially high opportunity cost to voting. There's debates about whether to have election day be a holiday or on a weekend, because a lot of people work or go to school or do something else that the time conflicts with voting. There's also this term you should know, political efficacy, which is the belief that an individual can have an impact on the government. And the higher your political efficacy, the more likely you are to vote. So if you believe that you can have an impact on the government, then you are more likely to vote. Some people, however, vote out of civic duty, even if they feel their vote won't make much of a difference. Rather, they feel that they should do it as an American. So registering to vote used to be kind of a hassle, but today it's gotten quite a bit easier. So there are different voter registration laws, and this is really dependent on the individual state. They were originally created to help prevent voter corruption, but there have been times in history when they have been used to discriminate against a specific group of people, most notably African Americans. Some states have made it more difficult to register individuals than others, and in 1993, the federal government passed the Motor Voter Act, which states that states are required to allow registration on driver's license applications. So when you go and you get your driver's license, you can automatically register to vote then. So who votes? Well, you should definitely be familiar with these categories related to voter turnout. 1. Education. This is something I've talked about in many chapters before. The higher the education, the higher the voter turnout. Age. The older an individual, the more likely they are to vote. And race. Minorities usually vote less often, although African Americans voted in very high numbers in the election of 2008. When it comes to gender, women vote at slightly higher rates than men, and married couples vote more often than those that are single. And government employees, finally, vote more often as well than other individuals. Now, it's important to note that these categories are cumulative. And what that means is the more one belongs to, the more likely they will vote. So if you have an elderly couple that is highly educated, that were former government employees, they would be highly likely to vote. Okay, let's talk about citizens' decisions. There's this theory called the mandate theory of elections, and this is the belief that the winning candidate has a mandate or the authority to carry out their platform. And we really saw this in 1844 when James K. Polk really ran on manifest destiny, and he believed he had the authority to expand the United States. You also saw this in 2004 with George W. Bush with the war in Iraq. Party identification helps voters decide who to vote for when little is known about the candidate. So an individual could say, no, this person is a Democrat or this person is a Republican, so I have a general idea of what their beliefs would be. And over time, people vote for candidates of different parties rather than just pick one party. And this is known as ticket splitting or floating voters. Now, when it comes to evaluating candidates, there are 3 aspects of a candidate's image that are important to the public. One is integrity, and the higher the perceived integrity, the more likely a candidate is to receive votes. Another one is reliability, and the more reliable a candidate is perceived to be, the more likely they are to receive votes. And when John Kerry ran against George W. Bush in 2004, Kerry was painted as a flip-flopper on certain issues, and this really made him appear to be not very reliable. And finally, competence is a huge aspect of a candidate's image, and this is arguably the most influential of the 3, and perceived intelligence really does matter for candidates. Okay, let's talk about policy voting. This is the idea how people vote is based on their preferences of issues, and there are 4 conditions of policy voting. 1, voters understand their own position on specific policies. 2, voters know where candidates stand on issues, which can be difficult sometimes. Voters see differences on issues between candidates, which also can be difficult sometimes. And finally, number 4, voters vote for the candidate that matches up with their policy preferences. And this actually happens a lot less than you would probably think. It's not very easy to meet all 4 conditions. So what are some obstacles to policy voting? In other words, why doesn't this happen more often? Well, candidates are often ambiguous on issues. They don't come out and give a clear position. Let's talk about the Electoral College, one of the most debated topics in political science today. Why is there an Electoral College? Well, framers did not want the people to elect the president. They were afraid about the general people voting for the president. So let's talk about how electoral votes are determined. Well, each state is guaranteed a minimum of 3, 2 for the senator, plus 1 for each member of the House. And even the smallest states have 1 member of the House. So that's at least 3 that they will have. There are 538 electoral votes total, and they get that number by 100 senators, plus 435 members of the House, plus 3 electoral votes for those living in Washington, D.C. Remember, those people living in Washington, D.C. do not have senators or members of the House. And 1 more than half of the electoral votes are needed to win the presidency. So a candidate needs to win 270 to become president. And here is the electoral map of 2000. There is a more recent one out in 2010, but here is the 2000 electoral map. You can tell that California is the largest state in the country. They had 55 votes then. Texas second with 34. and then New York third with 31. The state parties select the electoral voters, and 48 states take a winner-take-all approach. What does that mean? Well, it means that the states give every single electoral vote to the candidate that wins the most popular votes in the state. So whichever candidate receives the most votes from New York State, they will get all 31 of the electoral votes. Now, if you look at Nebraska and Maine, you see it's divided up a little differently. Well, those two states divide up votes based on winners of congressional districts. So it's not a statewide winning, rather it is the congressional districts. What happens if a candidate does not have an electoral majority? Well, the House of Representatives, according to the 12th Amendment, gets to choose among the top 3 candidates. And you can see the corrupt bargain, the election of 1824, with my boy Henry Clay. Yes, I have a video on that. Check it out in the description below if you just miss Henry Clay like I do quite often. So what's the impact of the Electoral College? Definitely be sure you know this. Smaller states are often overlooked in campaigns because their numbers are so small. Candidates often campaign mostly in close or swing states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, which do not tend to vote for a specific party. Rather, the states vote for different parties depending on elections. And smaller states also are often overrepresented due to the electors for senators. So just because teeny tiny Wyoming and Montana are guaranteed to have senators, they are actually overrepresented compared to other states. And the Electoral College also helps reinforce the two-party system. Okay, let's finish up with understanding elections and voting behavior. Elections not only select policymakers, but they also shape public policy. Those who are elected help dictate public policy. Many elections are based on the idea of retrospective voting, and voters often ask the question, what have you done for me lately? And we'll vote on people based on that. And the economy has an enormously huge impact on incumbent politicians. If the economy is doing well, incumbent politicians are rewarded. If it's not doing well, they tend to not be rewarded as much. And when it comes to the scope of government and elections, those that believe they can influence the government tend to believe that the government should have increased power. All right, let's do a quick recap of this chapter. Know the 3 types of elections. Also be familiar with referendum and initiative. Political efficacy, definitely, absolutely, positively know that term. The Motor Voter Act made registration for voting much easier nationwide. Categories related to voter turnout, be familiar with them. And the Electoral College. Not only know what it is, but the impacts as well. All right, guys, congratulations. As Henry Clay says, you are halfway done with this book. 10 chapters down, 10 more to go. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you have not already, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel. Help me spread the word. If you found this video helpful, please share it with somebody. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the section below. I look forward to seeing you right back here for Chapter 11, and best of luck on all of your tests, especially the one in May. Thanks for sticking with me another chapter. Have a good day, guys.